Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are wrestling with, well, maybe the ultimate question of identity. Forget your passport, forget your job title. We're asking, what exactly are you?
Right. Are you just a really complex biological machine? Or maybe some kind of ghost in the machine?
Or is the whole reality you perceive just something your mind cooks up?
It's a huge topic. We're diving deep into the absolute bedrock of these conceptual conflicts in the philosophy of mind. Our sources today, they pull from centuries of really rigorous debate. Think Descartes, Kripke, Putnam, Chalmers, Fodor, the heavyweights.
And we're not just summarizing here.
No, definitely not. We're digging into the specific, sometimes quite sophisticated arguments they actually use.
Okay, so our mission today, it's simple but, well, pretty profound. Provide a kind of navigable map of the central ideas about how the mental relates to the physical. We're breaking down these conceptual battlegrounds into four big arenas.
First, there's the nature of the self and dualism, this idea of mind and body being separate.
Then the claims of materialism, the idea that everything is physical, basically.
Then we tackle intentionality, that strange ability of our thoughts to be about things.
And finally, the really big one, maybe the hardest one, consciousness itself. The subjective feeling of it all.
Yeah, prepare for some intellectual vertigo, maybe. We're looking at positions that range from the mind being this fundamentally simple, non-physical thing,
all the way to the idea that your deepest beliefs, your feelings, they might just be a kind of, well, a badly constructed folk theory.
a theory that neuroscience might just eliminate entirely. So we really need to unpack the nuances, get why concepts like pain or belief or even the self are just so tricky, so resistant to simple answers.
Okay, let's start where the modern debate really kicks off, substance dualism. And you can't talk about that without mentioning René Descartes.
Absolutely. His core idea is this radical separation. The mind, the thing that thinks it's a completely different kind of stuff from the body. The mind has no extension in space. The body does. Simple as that. On the surface.
And the strength of his argument, it seems to rest on two main pillars.
That's right. The first is something we can all kind of relate to, or at least imagine. The claimed conceivability of your own disembodiment. You can picture yourself existing, thinking, maybe even sensing, while your physical body isn't there anymore.
Like a ghost, basically. I can imagine being a ghost.
Sort of, yeah. And the second pillar, this is where it gets philosophically tricky.
This is a controversial move, right?
Exactly. Arguing that if you can clearly and distinctly conceive of something without logical contradiction, then that thing must be genuinely possible in reality.
But hang on, does conceiving something really mean it's possible? Our sources seem to suggest that's a pretty big leap.
It's a huge leap, and it's where the argument gets really problematic. What exactly is that cognitive act when we conceive of being disembodied? Are we really grasping a genuine possibility, or are we maybe just fooling ourselves? Subject to what some philosophers call a systematic illusion about what's really possible.
So my imagination might be misleading me about the fundamental nature of things.
It might be. Think about the word I. If I, the thing I refer to when I use that word, is actually, for all I know, essentially a compound thing, part mind, part matter then. Well, maybe I can conceive of a mind like mine existing without a body.
Okay.
But that doesn't logically prove that I, this actual person, this compound thing, could exist without the body part. The conceivability might just show a limit in my understanding of what I truly am.
Right. So it all hinges on what I actually points to. Is it just the soul or the whole package?
Precisely. And many opponents of this simple dualism argue I usually means the whole package, even if the soul is, let's say, the necessary bit for having thoughts and feelings.
The purely psychological stuff.
Yeah, the purely psychological properties. But I, the person, is almost certainly this mix, this compound of physical and maybe spiritual parts. Even Descartes himself kind of admitted this, didn't he? He talked about being very closely joined and, as it were, intermingled with his body.
Yeah, it's not like a sailor in a ship, he said. It's more intimate.
Much more intimate. We experience ourselves as this unified whole, not separate components, just interacting.
Okay, but to push back against the materialists who say everything depends on the physical body, dualists have these thought experiments, right? Like Swinburne's non-identity problem with the brain transplant.
Ah, yes, the brain transplant. This is a really powerful challenge, specifically aimed at physicalist accounts of personal identity. What makes you you over time?
So walk us through it. You take a brain.
Imagine the most complete, perfect brain division and transplant possible. We take your brain, split it neatly into two functional halves, including the brainstem, all the connections.
Okay, bit gruesome, but okay.
and we put each half into a brand new identical body, body A and body B. Now, two people wake up. Let's call them alpha and beta.
And both alpha and beta would act just like me. Remember my life?
Exactly. They both have your memories, your personality traits. They'd claim to be you. But here's the catch. As soon as they wake up, they start having different experiences. Alpha stubs his toe, beta reads a different book. They immediately become distinct individuals.
So alpha and beta are definitely not the same person as each other.
No way. But here comes the logical hammer.
Yeah.
The necessity of identity. It's a
Yeah.
fundamental rule of logic. If something, let's say O, the original you, is identical to alpha,
Right.
and O is also identical to beta,
Mm-hmm.
then logically alpha must be identical to beta. It's like saying if A, B, and B, C, that A has to equal C.
But we just established alpha and beta aren't identical. They're two different people now.
Precisely. Since alpha and beta are different, neither of them can be numerically identical to the original you, O. Because if one of them was O, the other one would have to be 2, leading to the contradiction.
Wow. Okay. So what does that tell us?
The implication, according to the sources pushing this argument, is pretty stark. Just knowing what happens to the physical stuff, the brain, the body doesn't tell you what happens to the person. It suggests that the real you, the locus of identity, must be something more than just matter, something non-physical.
That is a radical conclusion, but maybe not as radical as the next position, idealism, moving from two substances to just one.
Even more radical, yeah. We're talking about the kind of idealism strengthened by philosophers like Howard Robinson, aiming to prove that the entire world is, in fact, mental, all of it.
Okay, how on earth do they argue for that? It sounds counterintuitive, to say the least.
It relies on making a very careful distinction, redefining what we mean by reality. They separate two concepts of the world. First, there's the empirical world.
That's the world we see and touch. Tables, chairs, stars.
Exactly. The world of our experience, the world that science investigates. Then second, there's the transcendental world.
Transcendental, meaning what exactly?
Meaning the world as it might exist in itself, totally independent of our minds. If such a world exists, it's the ultimate reality that's somehow responsible for causing our experiences, but it's beyond our direct access.
Okay, I need an analogy. Is it like the difference between the images on my computer screen and the actual code and hardware hidden inside the box making those images appear?
That's a really good way to think about it. The empirical world is the screen interface, what we directly experience and measure. The transcendental world is the hidden server room, the thing in itself operating independently.
Got it. So the idealist says these two things. The screen and the server can't be the same thing.
They argue they cannot be identical. And the argument is quite rigorous. It turns on logic, possibility, and necessity.
How does that work?
The argue is part of the very concept of the physical world, the empirical world, that it's something we can investigate scientifically. Science studies the physical world.
Makes sense.
But, they continue, there's absolutely no guarantee that the transcendental world, the world in itself, the hidden server, has the same characteristics that science tells us the empirical world has. We can imagine a world in itself that doesn't follow our laws of physics, for instance. It's conceivable.
So it's possible that the underlying reality, the transcendental world, is fundamentally different from the physical world we experience and measure.
Exactly. It is possible that the transcendental world is not the physical world.
Okay. And why is that possibility so important?
Because of that necessity of identity rule we just talked about with the brain transplant. If two things are truly identical, they must be identical in all possible worlds. There can't be even a possible scenario where they are different.
Ah, I see. So if it's possible, they are different.
Then they are not identical, period. The transcendental world, the ultimate reality, is therefore not the physical world we experience.
Which leads to the idealist's big conclusion.
The physical world, the empirical world of tables, stars, your own body, isn't the independent underlying reality. It is instead entirely mental. It's constituted by our directly experienced ideas maybe shared across minds, like a collective, phenomenal world.
Shared dream, almost. Wow. Okay, whether we're talking two substances or just mental substance, we run into that classic problem you mentioned earlier, the problem of interaction.
The perennial thorn in the side of dualism, yes. How can something immaterial, like a mind or soul, possibly push around physical stuff, like neurons in the brain, to make your body move?
And the big worry today is physics, right? doesn't interaction violate basic laws like the conservation of energy or the idea that the physical world is causally closed, that physical events only have physical causes?
That's the standard objection, yes. But interestingly, before we even get to the physics, the sources point out a major conceptual hurdle. We don't actually have a clear, agreed-upon, non-question begging definition of what counts as physical.
What do you mean? Seems obvious enough.
Does it? If you define physical as, say, anything that can exert force or do work on a physical system, well, if the mind does cause bodily actions, which is what we're trying to explain, then the mind, by that definition, is physical.
Oh, right. That just defines the problem away. It's a circular argument.
It's an empty victory for materialism. We need a way to define the physical realm without already assuming that only physical things can cause physical effects. Otherwise, we're just begging the question against the dualist from the start.
Okay, tricky definition aside, let's assume we can define physical somehow. How does a dualist even begin to explain interaction without, having the ghost literally push atoms around and violate the laws of physics?
Well, there are sophisticated attempts. E.J. Lowe, for instance, offers a model for interaction without conflict. It's quite subtle.
How does it work? Does the mind sneak in between the gaps?
Not quite like that. Lowe suggests that when a mental event M, like your decision to raise your hand, causes a physical event E, like your hand actually going up, M is not the direct cause of any individual neural firing in the complex chain of events in your brain that leads to E.
Wait, so every single neuron firing in that process still has a purely physical cause, like the neuron before it firing?
Exactly. If you trace back the causal history of any single event within that neural cascade, let's call it the neural causal tree, that results in your hand move, you'll only find physical causes, physical antecedents. M doesn't jump in and zap a specific neuron to get things started.
Okay. Then how is M causing anything if it doesn't start the chain or interfere with it?
Lowe's idea is that M is causally responsible for something different. It's responsible for the existence of the entire causal tree itself, structured precisely in the way that culminates in E, the hand movement.
So the mental cause isn't tweaking the physics within the sequence of events, but it's responsible for the fact that this particular pattern of physical events, the one leading to the intended action, came into being in the first place.
That's the core idea. The fact that there's this complex structure of neural events converging in just the right way to produce E, that fact, Lowe argues, might not be fully explainable just by looking at the physical events before E. The mental act, the volition M, is necessary and sufficient for the existence of that specific goal-directed physical causal structure.
So the mind selects or brings about the overall pattern without violating the microphysics at each step.
That's the proposal. It allows the mental cause to be genuinely efficacious to make a real difference without directly conflicting with physical law like conservation of energy at the level of individual events. It's a way to have your dualist cake and eat it too, perhaps.
Okay, so if dualism struggles with interaction, materialism seems to offer a clean solution and just say the mind is physical, problem solved, right? The earliest, maybe crudest version of this was behaviorism.
Right, behaviorism basically tried to dissolve the mind-body problem by, well, denying the mind part, at least the inner private part. To be minded for a behaviorist was simply to behave in certain complex ways, or to be disposed to behave that way.
So feeling pain isn't some internal ouchy sensation.
Nope. It's just the disposition to wince or groan or say, that hurts, or pull your hand away from the hot stove. They tried to define all mental states purely in terms of observable inputs and behavioral outputs.
But that feels really incomplete. It just leaves out the subjective experience, doesn't it?
Massively incomplete. And this failure was brilliantly exposed by Hilary Putnam's famous thought experiment, the Super Spartans objection.
Ah, the Super Spartans. Tell us about them.
Okay, imagine a whole community, a race of beings who are, let's say, culturally conditioned or maybe just incredibly stoic. They feel pain just like we do. They have the awful internal subjective agony. But they have trained themselves perfectly to suppress all outward pain behavior. They never wince, never cry out. They won't even admit they're in pain if you ask them directly. They act completely normal, even under conditions that would make us scream.
So they have the inner feeling, but none of the behaviorist-defined dispositions.
Exactly. And Putnam's point is, we can conceive of such beings without any logical contradiction.
Yeah.
It seems perfectly possible, even if unlikely.
Right. And we can also imagine someone acting like they're in pain when they're not, like an actor.
Precisely. So since we can logically separate the inner state, pain, from the outward behavior, pain behavior, the behaviorist's attempt to define the mental state purely in terms of behavior must be wrong. It fails as a logical analysis of what psychological terms actually mean. The inner state has to be something distinct.
Okay, so behaviorism is out. If the internal reality of mental states is back on the table, the materialist needs another approach. Which brings us to the identity theory.
Yes, the mind-brain identity theory. This was the next big move. It's much more direct. Mental states, like pain or thinking about Vienna, are simply numerically identical to physical states in the brain. They are one and the same thing.
The classic example being pain is C fiber firing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It takes a mind-body problem and turns it into essentially a scientific identity claim, like discovering that water is H2O or like lightning is electrical discharge.
But there's a subtlety here, isn't there? Type versus token identity.
Crucial distinction, yes. Token identity just means that this particular instance of pain you're feeling right now is identical to this particular instance of C fiber firing happening in your brain right now. Most philosophers, even many dualists, might grant that.
Okay.
But for materialism to be a complete theory of the mind, reducing psychology to neuroscience, it needs type identity. That's a much stronger claim. It says the property of being in pain, the type of state painfulness, is identical to the property of having C fibers firing in a certain way, the neural type N.
So the general category of pain is the same thing as the general category C fiber firing.
That's the claim. It has to hold universally for the type itself. And that's the claim that runs into serious trouble, particularly from Saul Kripke's modal argument.
Right. Kripke's argument, this gets technical, involving rigid designators. We need to unpack this carefully.
Absolutely. This is a cornerstone of modern analytic philosophy, and it's powerful. A rigid designator is basically a term like a proper name, say Saul Kripke, or a natural kind term like water or gold that refers to the very same object or substance in every possible world where that object or substance exists.
So water always picks out H2O, no matter what counterfactual world we imagine.
If H2O exists there, yes. Even if in some other world the stuff in the rivers and lakes is, I don't know, some other clear liquid XYZ, water still refers to H2O. It rigidly designates that substance.
Okay. And Kripke's big point about identity statements involving these terms.
His point is, if you have a true identity statement connecting two rigid designators like water is H2O, then that statement isn't just true, it's necessarily true. It has to be true in all possible worlds. It couldn't possibly be false.
Okay. So how does this apply to pain is C fiber firing? If pain and C fiber firing are both terms for natural kinds and thus rigid designators.
Then if the identity theory is true, the statement pain is C fiber firing must be necessarily true. It can't just be a contingent fact about our world that could have been different.
But that feels wrong. It feels very contingent. I can easily imagine feeling pain even if my brain was made of silicon or C fibers firing without any feeling at all. It seems possible they could come apart.
Exactly. It feels contingent. Now, Kripke acknowledges this feeling, but he argues that for many scientific identities, like heat is molecular motion, this feeling of contingency is misleading. It can be explained away.
How does he explain away the feeling that heat could have been something else?
He argues that the identity, heat is molecular motion, is necessary, even though we discovered it empirically, a posteriori. It feels contingent only because the way we identify heat in the first place, the way the reference of the term heat gets fixed, is through an accidental property.
Accidental property.
Yeah, the property of producing a certain sensation in us. Let's call sensation S, the feeling of warmth. That sensation is how we pick out heat, but it's not the essence of heat. Heat itself is molecular motion.
Okay. So we can imagine a world where
maybe intense light rays or, Maxwell's demons cause that same sensation S. In that world, we might say, wow, those light rays feel hot. But the light rays wouldn't be heat. Heat would still be molecular motion if it existed in that world. We'd just be mistaking the accidental symptom, sensation S, for the underlying reality. Our intuition of contingency is really about the link between molecular motion and sensation S, not about the identity itself.
Right, I think I get that. We mistake the feeling of heat for heat itself. But Kripke says this explanation strategy completely fails for pain. Why?
Because, he argues, pain is different. Pain is not picked out by some accidental property that is distinct from its essence. Pain is picked out by being pain.
By the feeling itself, the immediate, awful, qualitative character.
Exactly. That is the essential property. There's no gap between the way we identify pain, its phenomenal feel, and what pain is. To be in the epistemic situation that is indistinguishable from having pain just to gauge it, is to have pain.
Unlike heat, where the feeling can come apart from the underlying physics.
Precisely. So, if the connection between pain and C fiber firing genuinely feels contingent, if we can conceive of one without the other, then Kripke says we have to take that intuition seriously. It's not just a mistake about accidental properties. It reflects a genuine contingency.
And if the identity statement pain and C fiber firing is contingent,
Then it cannot be an identity between two rigid designators, which means pain and C fiber firing are not the same thing. They are actually different. Kripke's argument is a massive blow to the classic type identity theory.
wow. Okay, so if simple identity is out, where does the materialist go next?
This leads us to functionalism, right?
Yeah.
Which is still probably the dominant view. It is, yeah. Functionalism arose largely, again, thanks to Hilary Putnam, as a direct response to problems of the identity theory, especially the multiple realizability argument.
Multiple realizability. That sounds like what we were just imagining with pain, maybe.
Very much related. The argument is simple but powerful. Think about pain again. In humans, maybe it's realized by C fibers firing. But surely we can imagine other creatures feeling pain.
Like an octopus. Or an alien made of silicon. Or maybe even a sophisticated AI someday.
Exactly. These creatures would have vastly different physical makeups. Octopus neurons are different from ours. Silicon chips are obviously different. If they can all be in the state of pain, then the mental state type pain can be realized by multiple different physical state types. Which means pain cannot be identical to any single one of those physical types, like C fiber firing. Type identity theory must be false.
So functionalism comes in and says,
Right.
it redefines mental states.
It does. It says, forget about what a mental state is made of, its physical realization. What matters is what it does, its function, its causal role in the system.
Like software running on different kinds of hardware.
That's the classic analogy, yes. A mental state like believing it will rain, or desiring coffee, or being in pain, is defined by its typical causes. Sensory inputs, other mental states, and its typical effects. Outputs like behavior, other mental states. It's defined by the pattern of causal connections it has within the whole system.
So it's holistic. You can't define one state without reference to others.
Very much so. For example, my desire for water only leads to the behavior of getting a glass if I also have the belief that there is water in the tap and the belief that turning the handle releases water and so on. The whole network defines the individual states.
Okay, now, functionalism itself isn't necessarily materialist.
Technically, no. A dualist could argue that the mind is a non-physical system with functional states. But in practice, most functionalists are materialists. They usually add an independent claim. As a matter of contingent fact, in our world, all these functional roles happen to be realized by physical stuff, namely brain states.
But doesn't this bring back a problem? If pain can be C fibers in me and something totally different in an octopus, what is the science of pain supposed to study?
Ah, you've hit on a key challenge raised forcefully by philosophers like Jaegwon Kim. If functional roles are multiply realized, then the higher level functional property pain corresponds to a really messy, disjunctive set of physical properties at the lower level. It's like pain, human C fiber state N1, or octopus neural state N2, or Martian silicon state N3, OR.
That doesn't sound like a unified scientific kind.
Not really. Kim argues that if you actually want to explain why someone feels pain, or predict when they will, appealing just to the abstract functional role isn't enough. You need to look at the specific physical realizer in that particular system, human, octopus, whatever. This implies that any real scientific explanation will ultimately have to be locally reductive.
Meaning the science of human pain reduces to human neuroscience, octopus pain reduces to octopus neurophysiology, etc.
Exactly. So while functionalism starts by emphasizing the autonomy of the mental from the physical, this pressure from multiple realization seems to push it back toward a kind of local, species-specific reductionism. It complicates the picture for a unified science of the mind.
Okay, whether we think the mind is dual, identical to the brain, or a functional state, we keep bumping up against the really hard nut to crack. Subjective experience, phenomenal consciousness. Philosophers call it qualia.
Qualia, yeah. The what it's like aspect, what it's like to see brilliant red or taste dark chocolate or feel a sharp pain. This brings us to Joseph Levine's concept of the explanatory gap.
The explanatory gap. What exactly is gapped?
It's the gap in our understanding. Levine argues that even if we knew absolutely everything about the physical processes involved in, say, seeing red, the wavelength of light hitting the retina, the signals traveling up the optic nerve, the specific pattern of neural firing in the visual cortex, let's call that physical story R.
Even if we knew all of that.
It still wouldn't make it intelligible why that physical process, R, produces this specific subjective feeling, the phenomenal quality of redness that you experience, rather than, say, the subjective feeling of green, G, or maybe no feeling at all.
So we can see the correlation R happens, red experience follows, but we can't grasp the connection. Why that feeling?
Exactly. The link remains opaque, brute, unintelligible. We can't seem to deduce the phenomenal character from the physical description. There's a gap in our explanation.
And if knowing all the physical facts still leaves this conceptual gap, maybe the problem isn't just that we haven't found the right physical theory yet. Maybe it's something deeper. This leads to that radical idea of cognitive closure, doesn't it?
It does. Colin McGinn is famous for exploring this possibility. Maybe the true underlying theory T that perfectly links the physical brain states with conscious experience is just inaccessible to human minds. Our brains might simply not be built to grasp it.
Like a dog trying to understand calculus.
Or maybe McGinn's preferred analogy. Think of a purely Humean mind, one whose concepts are strictly limited to what can be derived directly from sensory impressions. Such a mind would be constitutionally incapable of understanding modern physics, with its unobservable particles and abstract forces. It's conceptually closed off from that domain.
And maybe we are like that Humean mind when it comes to consciousness. Our brains evolved to deal with the external world. Maybe they just lack the conceptual tools to understand their own inner nature.
That's the idea. Perhaps our conceptual system is structured such that we have one way of thinking about physical things, neurons, brains, and another way of thinking about phenomenal experiences, feelings, qualia, and we simply lack the cognitive faculty to bridge the two, to represent both within a single, unified, intelligible framework.
So we might mistake our own cognitive limitations, our inability to see the connection for some deep, objective mystery or eeriness in the world itself.
Precisely. The solution linking brain and consciousness could, in principle, be fully physical, fully natural, but just forever beyond our conceptual horizon. A sobering thought.
Definitely. Okay, let's swing back to the functionalist defense. They need to handle qualia too. David Chalmers proposed the principle of organizational invariance. What's that?
Basically, it's the hypothesis that functional organization, if you specify it at a fine enough level of detail, capturing all the causal relationships that determine behavioral dispositions, is what fully determines conscious experience. If you replicate the functional organization, you replicate the qualia.
And to argue for this, he uses another famous thought experiment, the fading qualia argument.
Right. This is aimed squarely at anyone who thinks qualia could somehow float free from function, that you could have the same functional organization but different or absent qualia.
How does it work? Neurons get replaced.
Imagine, Chalmers says, that we gradually replace each neuron in your brain, one by one, with a tiny silicon chip that performs exactly the same local function. It takes the same inputs from other neurons or chips and produces the same outputs.
So the overall pattern of causal interactions, the functional organization, is perfectly preserved at every single step. Your behavior would remain identical.
Absolutely identical. Now, the anti-functionalist has to say that as you replace biological neurons with silicon chips, your subjective experience, your qualia, must change or fade away, even though your behavior doesn't change at all.
Okay, so what's the problem with that?
Well, if the qualia do fade, Chalmers argues, it leads to one of two really bizarre, implausible conclusions. Option 1. There are weird discontinuities in nature. Maybe replacing the 10 billionth neuron suddenly makes all your qualia vanish entirely. That seems incredibly unlikely for fundamental laws of nature.
Right, nature doesn't usually have sharp, arbitrary cutoffs like that. What's option 2?
Option 2. The resulting person, let's call him Joe, who now has a silicon brain but perfect functional isomorphism to your original brain, becomes what philosophers call a zombie in a specific sense. He behaves exactly like you, talks about his rich inner life, insists he sees red and feels pain. But internally, subjectively, there's nothing. It's all dark inside.
So Joe is systematically deluded about his own consciousness.
Massively deluded. He's a fully rational system, capable of introspection and reporting, yet he's completely wrong about the most immediate aspect of his existence. Chalmers argues this kind of massive systematic delusion in a functionally intact rational system is just too implausible to accept.
So the implausibility of fading qualia without behavioral change forces us to conclude
That functional isomorphs must have qualitatively identical experiences. Functional organization at the right level of detail does determine consciousness. Qualia don't fade.
that's a strong defense for functionalism. But they still face that other classic challenge, Frank Jackson's knowledge argument, the story of Mary, the color scientist.
Ah, Mary in the black and white room.
Yes.
Yes. She's got enduring intuitive power. Mary knows every physical fact there is to know about color vision, the physics of light, the neurophysiology of the retina and brain, all of it. But she's lived her whole life in a black and white environment.
She's never actually seen red.
Never. Then, one day, she's released from the room and sees a ripe red tomato for the first time. The argument is, clearly, she learned something new. She learns what it's like to see red.
And if she learned something new, but she already knew all the physical facts,
Then there must be more facts than just the physical facts. There must be non-physical, phenomenal facts. Physicalism is therefore false. That's the punchline.
it seems convincing. How do materialists respond? David Lewis had a famous counter, right? The ability hypothesis.
Yes, Lewis and others following him argue that Jackson's argument makes a subtle mistake. What Mary gains when she sees red is not new factual information, not new knowing that. Instead, she gains new abilities, knowing how.
Knowing how to do what?
She gains the ability to remember what red looks like, the ability to imagine red in her mind's eye, and crucially, the ability to recognize red when she encounters it again. These are cognitive skills, practical abilities, not propositional facts about the world.
So learning facts is different from gaining abilities through experience.
That's the idea. We learn facts from books and lectures, like Mary did, but we typically gain these kinds of recognitional and imaginative abilities through direct experience. So it's completely unsurprising that Mary had to have the experience of seeing red to acquire these new abilities. It doesn't imply she learned a new non-physical fact.
So the knowledge argument might just show that consciousness is needed for certain skills, not that consciousness itself involves non-physical information.
That's the essence of the ability hypothesis defense. It cleverly sidesteps the conclusion that physicalism is false.
Okay, let's shift gears from the feeling side of the mind to the thinking side. Intentionality. You called it the mark of the mental.
Yes. It's often considered a defining characteristic of mental states like beliefs, desires, thoughts, hopes. It's their aboutness or directedness. They point beyond themselves to objects, properties, states of affairs in the world.
And what's so extraordinary about that?
Well, think about it. Your thought about the Eiffel Tower somehow reaches across space to connect with that specific structure in Paris. Your memory about your 10th birthday reaches back in time. Your mathematical thought about prime numbers points to abstract objects that don't even exist in space or time. How does a physical state in your brain, just a pattern of neurons firing, manage to selectively refer to these other things? Some distant, some past, some abstract. It seems almost magical.
Yeah, how does brain stuff point, especially when we think about things that don't exist, like unicorns, or when we make mistakes?
Exactly. Misrepresentation, or error, is a huge challenge for naturalistic theories of intentionality, particularly causal theories. This leads us to Jerry Fodor's disjunction problem.
Okay, the disjunction problem. What's the issue?
Well, suppose you're trying to build a simple causal theory of meaning. Let's say the mental symbol or word horse in your language of thought get its meaning because it's reliably caused by encounters with actual horses.
Okay, seems reasonable. Horse causes horse thought.
Right. But what happens when something else occasionally causes you to token the horse symbol? Maybe on a dark night or from really far away, you mistake a cow for a horse. So cows, let's call them B, sometimes cause the horse symbol, even though horses A are the main cause.
Right, mistakes happen.
The problem for the simple causal theory is, if the symbol is caused by A's, horses, and sometimes by B's, cows, what does the symbol actually mean? The theory seems forced to say it means the disjunction of its causes. It means horse or cow.
But that can't be right. If it means horse or cow, then when a cow causes it, the thought isn't an error anymore. It's a true thought. A cow is a horse or cow.
Exactly. The theory seems unable to account for genuine misrepresentation or error. It makes error impossible if the meaning is just the disjunction of all possible causes. We need a way to privilege the correct cause, horses, over the mistaken cause, cows.
We need to break the symmetry between the causes. How did Fodor propose to do that naturalistically?
He proposed the asymmetric dependence solution. It's clever, but it involves thinking about counterfactual situations. What would happen if things were different?
Okay, walk me through the asymmetry.
Fodor argues that the causal link from the mistaken cause, B, cows, to the symbol horse is asymmetrically dependent on the causal link from the correct cause, A, horses, to the symbol horse.
Asymmetrically dependent, meaning?
Meaning the dependence only goes one way. We test it with counterfactuals.
If the A link didn't exist, if horses stopped causing the horse symbol, then the B link would also cease to exist. Cows wouldn't cause the horse symbol anymore either because the cow causings are just parasitic errors relying on the main horse link.
Okay, the error link depends on the correct link.
But, and here's the asymmetry, the reverse is not true. If the B link vanished, if cows somehow stopped causing the horse symbol, maybe you get better eyesight, the A link would remain perfectly intact. Horses would still cause the horse symbol just fine.
Ah, I see. The correct link, A, is independent, but the mistaken link, B, depends on A.
Precisely. This asymmetric dependence breaks the symmetry between the causes. The meaning of the symbol horse is determined by the independent cause, A, horses. The dependent causal pathway, from B, cows, is thereby defined as the pathway for error or misrepresentation. When a cow causes the horse token, it's false because that causal link is merely dependent on the primary, meaning giving link from horses.
That's quite an intricate solution to keep meaning grounded in causation while allowing for mistakes.
Okay, finally, we have to face the most provocative, perhaps unsettling materialist position, eliminative materialism. Yeah, this is the really radical end of the spectrum, championed most prominently by Paul Churchland. The core idea is that our ordinary common sense way of talking about the mind, using terms like belief, desire, intention, fear, what philosophers call folk psychology or FP, isn't just incomplete or in need of refinement.
What is it then?
Churchland argues it's a fundamentally false and misleading theory about what's going on in our heads. And like other false scientific theories from the past, it won't be smoothly reduced to neuroscience. It will be eliminated and replaced by it.
So just like we stopped talking about phlogiston in chemistry or demons causing disease, we'll eventually stop talking about beliefs and desires.
That's the prediction. He argues folk psychology is essentially a stagnant, primitive theory with major flaws.
What kind of flaws does he point to? Why call it a failed theory?
Well, first, he points to its massive explanatory failures. Think about all the things FP tells us virtually nothing about. Sleep, learning, memory consolidation, creativity, the nature of intelligence differences, mental illness. The list is huge. For a supposed theory of the mind, it leaves vast domains completely dark.
Okay, it's not comprehensive. What else?
Second, he argues it shows all the signs of a degenerating research program. It hasn't really progressed significantly in thousands of years. And third, perhaps most importantly, it looks increasingly difficult to integrate FP with the framework of our other successful sciences, particularly evolutionary biology and especially neuroscience. The categories of FP, like discrete propositional attitudes, just don't seem to map cleanly onto the messy, dynamic, distributed patterns of activity that neuroscientists are actually finding in the brain.
So the concepts themselves, belief, desire, might be the wrong categories altogether for understanding cognition.
That's the core claim. Just as caloric fluid was the wrong category for understanding heat, belief might be the wrong category for understanding how our brains store and process information. Neuroscience will develop its own conceptual framework, likely talking about activation vectors and neural networks, synaptic weight distributions, and so on, and the old FP terms will simply fade away as obsolete.
What about the functionalists who try to save belief and desire by defining them functionally?
Churchland calls this the functionalist stratagem, and he's quite critical. He says trying to define belief by its functional role is like alchemists trying to save their theory by defining being ensouled by mercury by its functional role, like dissolving gold.
It's trying to preserve a bad concept.
Exactly. If the concept itself, belief, phlogiston, ensoulment by mercury, doesn't actually pick out a coherent, natural kind or process in the world, if it lacks natural integrity, then defining it by its supposed functional role doesn't save it. It's just putting lipstick on a theoretical pig. The underlying reality, Churchland predicts, will be described in a radically different vocabulary, one that neuroscience provides. Our inner life won't involve beliefs or desires in anything like the way we currently conceive them. #tag outro.
Wow, what an absolutely mind-bending journey. We've gone from, the possibility of the self being an immaterial soul that could potentially survive having his brain split in two,
all the way through materialism, identity theory, functionalism, culminating in the idea that our entire common sense understanding of our own minds, our language of belief and desire, might just be, fundamentally wrong, a placeholder theory waiting to be thrown out.
The core tensions are incredibly sharp, aren't they? Dualism keeps slamming into that wall of explaining interaction, even with clever moves like Lowe's.
And materialism, even in its sophisticated functionalist forms, still has to grapple with the raw feel of experience. The Qualia problem, the explanatory gap, and Kripke's powerful challenge to identifying mental states directly with brain states.
Yeah, and functionalism, while maybe the best bet for materialism, faces its own challenges. Like the fading qualia argument, pushing it towards accepting that function must determine consciousness, even if we can't understand why, and Kim's point about local reduction. The mind just resists easy answers.
It really does. And what we've seen is that really digging into these questions about the self, about consciousness, it forces us into some truly radical possibilities. It destabilizes our most basic assumptions about who and what we are.
Whether you lean towards thinking we're fundamentally non-physical, or that our inner life is purely biological, but perhaps too complex for us to ever fully grasp.
Or even that our familiar mental vocabulary is just plain wrong. The sheer difficulty, the resistance the mind offers to simple explanation, that seems to be the main takeaway.
Which brings us to our final reflective question for you, the listener. Considering the force of these arguments, especially those hinting at cognitive closure, the idea that the ultimate truth about the mind-body relationship might just be beyond human comprehension. What should we see as the real goal of philosophy of mind?
Is the aim to find the final, objective, factual truth about how mind relates to matter? Or is progress measured differently here?
Perhaps progress is more about mapping the limits of our own understanding, charting the boundaries of human conceptualization when faced with the sheer undeniable reality of our own conscious experience. What do you think our brains are ultimately capable of discovering about themselves?